You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast, loyal listeners literally all over the world, 90 countries now, all 50 U.S. states, 1,500 cities. We're so thankful for all of you. And I have a feeling I know why you're here. We're bringing you the very best selling fiction and the very best authors. We are absolutely thrilled to have MP Woodward with us here today because he is an amazing author with the very distinguished privilege of penning the new Tom Clancy novel, Shadow State, which, by the way, is phenomenal. And welcome, Mike. So good to have you here.
Hey, guys. It is wonderful to be here. Thank you so much.
Now, before we get started, we like to tell our listeners a little bit about you because you got a pretty cool bio here that I saw on your website. You are the author of the Handler CIA Espionage series, and you also served for a decade as a U.S. Naval Intelligence Officer with the U.S. Pacific Command. You scripted scenario moves and counter moves for U.S. war game exercises in the Middle East. No wonder this book is so phenomenal. Also, you had multiple deployments to the Persian Gulf and Far East, where you worked alongside U.S. Special Forces, CIA, and NSA. Wow, that's something else. Now today, as if this isn't enough, I see you're running an international distribution marketing for Amazon Prime Video.
Well, I was until about 2 years ago. Yes.
Okay. Well, you sure are doing a lot. And now you're back to writing. We're thrilled about that because this Clancy novel is amazing. You live in the Pacific Northwest. And I just want to quote the New York Journal of Books because they say MP Woodward's writing is taut. His action scenes are superb. His mastery of plot is evident in the first few chapters. Yes, Kristen and I couldn't agree more. Let me translate all that for our listeners. In other words, you're going to be hooked from page one, and you're not going to be able to put this book down. Welcome.
I like that kind of welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, as Chris mentioned, Mike, we're here to talk about Shadow State, and I want to show our viewers on YouTube, at least, this really cool cover. This book was amazing, but I love this cover especially. Yeah. I like to give our listeners just a little bit of the background of what's going on in the story. I will not give away any spoilers. It is hard to do, so I'm going to keep it nice and brief. And if you want to add anything, by all means, please do. But in this story, Shadow State, we reconnect with one of our beloved characters in literature, and that is Jack Ryan Jr. His father is president, and at this point, Jack Ryan Jr., I might just call him Jack, is working as an analyst for Henley Associates. Now, they're sending him to Vietnam to check out some opportunities for investments. There's some growing businesses. There's a lot of excitement about certain areas. And in particular, he thinks that this one company, Geotech, they're dabbling in rare earth minerals. He thinks this might be a very good investment. On his way with one of his Henley colleagues, he has a helicopter crash. Now, we've got all kinds of excitement that happens with not only surviving this crash, but also now taking on a host of people who want to shut down what they are looking into and investigating. And in particular, some of Vietnam's neighbors, including China, are very concerned about making sure that nobody knows exactly what is going on with some of these businesses and some of these investment opportunities. So he is in a race for his life. He is trying to protect a wounded colleague. And as always, we're wondering, where is the government? Is there any protection? But not in this case. Now we are dealing with a shadow state in terms of what needs to be done for protection to get out of this situation. We loved the thrill and the excitement in the story. Did you want to add anything to that summary?
No, I think it's a wonderful summary. I guess I would say that where I tried to take this Jack Ryan Jr. story um, in a slightly different direction was to try to round out our hero a little bit in terms of giving him a fuller life, like most of us have. I wanted readers to see him working a little bit professionally, so it doesn't start with him and a secret operation. It starts with him basically operating his private equity business and getting dragged into something that has a national security implication. So I tried to match that up to what I see happening in the world with respect to tensions with China, the tech supply chain issues around rare earth minerals, and something of a tussle of the allegiance of Vietnam in this strategic competition with China.
There were so many really great hot button topics that are current. And that's what we love about really good fiction. It's not always pretend. It's based on a lot of true happenings and things that are going on in the world. So I just want to say for our listeners, let's call it this: Jack Ryan Jr. transitioning from active duty to an operational role. Are we going to call it auditor? Sort of was like an auditor. And I love that about him because he showed us he could do it, but he went there and found out something even bigger. It was another thrill ride. And one of my favorite lines in the book is what his father, Jack Ryan Sr., the president of the US, said. He offers a great speech to military engineers overseas, and he says this: folks, most of your fellow citizens don't know what you do. You're way the hell out here in the middle of this godforsaken desert. You see, they're busy living out the promise of this country: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They don't ask because they want to believe we got this. They never think about who's standing on the wall guarding their rights to freedom. Wow. I love this line. Is this true for us even today? Hey, thank you, Jack Ryan Jr., for being out there fighting for things that we don't realize what's going on. But what about in the real world? Are we unaware of the dangers that our nation faces? And maybe do we, as citizens, choose to ignore it so we can just be happy-go-lucky?
I think it's good that we are happy-go-lucky and are enjoying our freedoms as Americans, but it highlights that the investment in national security is very important, and that what can sound like certainly a lot of money in terms of the percentage of GDP and in terms of real dollars does something very, very important that we don't always necessarily see. And I wanted to, in that speech of Jack Ryan Sr.'s, I wanted him to highlight the heroic work of the people that aren't as overt, the people who wear uniforms and et cetera, which we certainly honor our veterans frequently, but there are no big victory parades for the people building, stealth technology or the next generation in important national defense issues. There aren't parades for people who have done really brave things in places like the CIA or the NSA. And so I wanted an opportunity for someone in the high position of government, in this case the president, to really make that point, and for him, that character, Jack Sr., to feel that point and to show that it was important to him. And preceding that, he basically told his staff, "Look, what these guys have done is damn near magical. I want to get out there and thank them personally." And that's what that scene was about. And yeah, it kind of came from the heart for me.
I love that scene. And it also was a wonderful tribute and honor to people who serve in all sorts of ways, not just combat, but as Jack Ryan came in the scene of this book as an auditor, even people who do that behind the scene, that every job matters. Were you implying that as well?
I was. One of the things that's been on my mind a lot over the last couple of years is that as the world has become digitized, as our economies become digitized, as computing resources are all in the cloud and are effectively something that companies tap into and rent and share, it's created a heightened threat around hacking, around just the way that countries go at war with each other. And the challenge, I think, is that countries are adversaries. In the old days, we had the Cold War. That's sort of our frame of reference, and we can think about the Soviet Union, and it really was a Cold War, right? I mean, it was freezing. There were not shots taking place. There were very few, active direct things, and you can think of some that were certainly, made the headlines, like Francis Gary Powers getting shot down in U2, that kind of thing. But I would contrast to what I see happening today in my research, which is that there is basically a constant, let's call it a warm war or a struggle in the shadows. And in this case, we call it the shadow war. And those things have been happening for a long time between Iran and Israel and some places that are, they're often thought of as flashpoints. But more and more, they've been happening with the United States as well, with threat actors doing things in the background, really to try to destabilize the US, to design ways to attack critical infrastructure, et cetera. And in my research, it would be very scary if we didn't have a very sharp line of defense set up in our national security apparatus, which means, yes, all those different people, not just people flying fighter planes or carrying rifles, but people that are looking after our infrastructure as well.
Excellent point.
Yeah, and I might add too that we are also fighting ideologies, whereas before maybe we had some identifiable political enemies. It's a little different now, and it crosses political boundaries, geographical ones. Very interesting. Um, I want to ask you, Mike, to dive a little deeper into something you were just talking about. We know that our American defense firms in particular are worried about spying, and we know that this is a big issue. Jack Ryan talked about it in the story. And I want to ask you, do you think it's even possible to stay a step ahead of these silent enemies, the ones trying to come in through some of those backdoor entrances to our defense firms?
I think it's certainly worth the effort, and I think that the investment that we make there does bear fruit, and that we prevent quite a bit. But is it is it impossible for it to be breached? No, absolutely not. I do think though that there's some things that make it a little bit more challenging for our adversaries than first appear. So with the right kind of preparation, once something is detected, it can be sort of counteracted and shut down very quickly. So as it pertains to things like computer viruses, there's various companies. Microsoft comes to mind. They operate a threat detection network, right? And so much of corporate infrastructure uses Microsoft that they are very quickly able to identify something and bring it down. I also know for research for a different book that I've been working on that some of our government agencies are actually out there in the market, buying up all the bad stuff, right? So trying to more or less soak up all the nefarious computer code, viruses, et cetera, that could be sold. And so is it impossible? No. Do we need to keep our guard up? Yes. And in this case, as we talk about China, Russia, and Iran in particular, I would probably add North Korea. But with China, when you read up on their industrial intelligence or industrial espionage efforts, which is really what this book is about, there's quotes out there from the FBI that basically say, we've never seen anything like this. To them, it's just total and complete. And I think Christopher Wray, the FBI director, said that they're opening, I don't remember what it was exactly. It was something like 1,000 to 2,000 investigations a week. And he was, I thought, quite honorably and nobly out with corporate America saying, hey, we're here to help. We want to know when you see things, we want to know, et cetera, so that we can jump in and protect against this. So I do think that it is a little bit of a situation where it's like, look, you need to value your country, you need to value your freedoms, and you need to be part of defending it all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's tricky too because these are silent threats for the most part. So sometimes it's hard to square the amount of money that's needed to combat what needs to be combated. And maybe people don't take that level of threat as seriously as they might because, they're not maybe on the front lines. They're not working as a defense contractor. Um, so I think there's a battle even internally, politically.
And that, by the way, that was a little bit of a theme of the book, where the defense technology that the US was working on, or is working on in the book, has to do with creating a stealth technology that would make things much more cost effective, right, in terms of investment for defeating enemy threat radars and those kinds of things, versus building a B-2 stealth bomber, a B-21 stealth bomber, which costs billions of dollars. And the idea in the book is that, yes, but with one sharp industrial intelligence effort, all of that can be turned inside out for naught. And that was something I really wanted to highlight.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to go back now and talk a little bit about our beloved character, Jack Ryan Jr., because we all love him so much. You showed us a couple different sides to him, his intelligence coming in with a different role, but also you showed a little weakness in him. He recalled his original training at the Virginia farm, and this scene just was a shocker to me. He was stripped naked, thrown into a pickle barrel, covered with water, and the only way he could breathe was to press his lips against the top of the container. His instructor kept repeating, "Your worst enemy is your imagination." I looked at that for a long time and I thought, isn't that true? That is your worst enemy. Was that something that you believe would have stuck with that character forevermore? That little bit of maybe fear of claustrophobia or where his imagination might go. And I feel like we can all learn something from this in the real world. Our imagination goes wild and we start putting limits on ourselves.
Yeah, that's right. That technique, that barrel with the water, that was something taken from actual SEER training. And I do think that, I'm a claustrophobic person, and you can absolutely see how well this is a function of your brain, right? If you're going to get out of here in 5 minutes, what's wrong with just sitting here? But yeah, you don't, you freak out. And so I wanted first off to highlight that Jack does have access to training resources that others don't, and it was set up on that Virginia farm that John Clark owns. And I think that the people that have brought him into this world want to put him through those kinds of difficult training processes, really to protect him and to make sure that if he ever gets in trouble, he's okay. So they put him through a lot to make sure that he will be all right in the future. And I wanted him to highlight the fact that, yeah, it's not always about, hey, I'm so strong, I can just break this barrel apart and I've got such courage, as it is like, okay, calm down. What's really happening here? Can I master this psychologically? And to highlight that he'd been trained to do so. So yeah, I think that that's true for all of us. Hopefully we're not locked in a barrel with water where we have to put our lips to a grape to breathe, but certainly surviving that kind of training would help us in a future where we're in an uncomfortable situation.
I love that about him. You made him real, personable and real. Thank you.
Thank you.
In your story, Jack and Howard encounter an older man in the Laotian highlands, and he says something to them in French that I thought was really interesting. He says, "Welcome, Americans. It's been a long time." And I was wondering if you could expand upon the relationship between the United States and Vietnam, especially in light of the fact that Vietnam has, the world's second largest reserve of rare earth minerals, and what that means for future relationships.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I've traveled extensively in Vietnam. I've lived in Southeast Asia. My brother currently lives in Southeast Asia, And it is a very tragic story of what happened between the United States and Vietnam. When the first armistice after World War I, Ho Chi Minh was super inspired and tried to approach Woodrow Wilson and say, "Hey, we're like you. We want to stand up for freedoms. You know, we heard your speech about the League of Nations. This is really who we are." And they really wanted to kind of stand up and throw off the yoke of colonialism. And so what we saw was, at the same time that Vietnam, this country that was trying to fight off the colonial French because they were being exploited, they reached out to us as allies. But at that very same time, we were struggling with the Cold War and what was developing after World War II as really a competition between, communism and capitalism, the United States and the Soviet Union. And Vietnam was, a potential ally in that. But because the French were on the American side, we had to stand up for the French when it came to Vietnam instead of them standing up to the French and fighting off colonialism. So they in the end turned to, I think the Soviet Union and manipulated that situation, and they turned to them. But I don't think there was ever this giant misalignment, or this thing that said, "Oh no, we're going to be the enemy of the United States." There were some things that happened in the 1950s where they again reached out, and where there were some people who actually saw it. Like, look, we're just looking at this through a Cold War lens. We should be looking at it through a colonial lens. But that wasn't the issue of the day, and so we ended up where we did. And that character, what I wanted to highlight was that it's not monolithic in that area. And so that particular character is a Hmong man who was a Montagnard back in the Vietnam War. And so these Montagnards were Hmong were persecuted by both the Vietnamese and the Laotian governments, and they wanted to help the U.S. during the war, and we relied on them for help. So the idea of that character was, well, he went back to his Hmong, lifestyle, which meant back to persecution. So when he comes across Jack and Howard in the jungles, he's like, "Oh my gosh," Jack and Howard are terrified, thinking they've come across an enemy, and he's basically saying, "No, I remember you guys." And I wanted, by the way, in this book throughout, I wanted to touch on that complex history. I had several characters who had experience from, older characters who had experience from the Vietnam War, and I wanted to raise some of those issues to contrast that time with today.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for those insights. That was very fascinating to hear what you had to say. And I also think you're foreshadowing future conflict over resources that is only growing and growing, whether it's water or rare earth minerals, things, we need as a modern society for our computers, our cell phones, our batteries, whatever it is. So that was very interesting. Well, I loved talking with you. I think Chris and I could probably keep you here for a very long time and ask you all kinds of questions about this fantastic book. But we want to thank you for coming on to discuss Shadow State. It is wonderful. I want to tell our listeners how to get in touch with you. You're very active on social media. You have a website, mpwoodward.com. You could also access the book through the Tom Clancy website as well. And Instagram, Facebook, you've got it all. I would just tell you, we'd love to have you back in the future, because I know there's going to be more Jack Ryan Jr. books. But this was fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yes.
Kristen, my genuine pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And even a future MP Woodward book. We'll get you back for that. We love your writing. Thanks so much.
You bet, guys. So nice to be on.
Yeah, Kristen, I love this talk about the geotech magnets, the rare refined earth mineral that was used to make magnets, and how these inner resources are being coveted and used. Now, I feel like we have progressed, as he said, to a world that is extremely computerized, cloud-centered. I don't believe the next war would be fought on the ground. I think it would be fought with technology. I've always sort of thought that. But I love that he brought in the fact that there still are natural resources that we are going to war over forever. Oil. I mean, we could list the list on and on. That was intriguing, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Especially because we need these rare earth minerals for technology, not just magnets, but batteries and other computer parts and semiconductors. So I agree. He really it was a little glimpse into, I think, a big part of what's coming, not only wars over ideologies, but also these resources. I was fascinated and very hooked by this book.
I was so fascinated by this rare earth magnet that takes on an incoming radio pulse, like a radar, turns it into a mirrored reciprocal field. I just was astounded. This is what I love about fiction, that it is not pretend. Of course, it's a pretend story, but it also is based on the reality of what we know to be true. And thank goodness, MP Woodward has a lot of knowledge in this regard. Just loved it. What did you think about this? I wrote this down. Stevenson said this in the book. It hit me. I wanted to make a difference. I just wanted to do something good. Wow. I thought, how many people are out there who still want that, who aren't looking for money, who aren't looking for fame, who aren't looking for power, fortune, all of these other things? Is there a good amount that still just wants to make a difference? I got to believe there is.
Yeah, I believe it too. And I think it goes back to something Mike said. He was talking about how the Vietnamese people were not a monolith. They didn't all think in the same way. In the same way, our military, our government, I think there are people who have their own agenda. There's people who have a suspect agenda. And then there's people who truly want what's best for the common good and the rest of the people. And we only can hope that there's more of those people than the ones that are fueled by ambition or something radical.
Well, I hate to add the word politics, but we could add that right now heading into September 2024. But let's not go there.
That's for sure. We'll get there soon enough. Well, listeners, we are excited about this book. Chris is holding up that beautiful cover. What an amazing book. And also fantastic interview with Mike MP Woodward. We have a great lineup of authors that are coming on board. And I want to just tell you about a couple of them. Jeffrey Deaver and Isabella Maldonado with Fatal Intrusion, Amy Runyon with Mademoiselle Eiffel, Shelley Noble, The Colony Club, Jessica Strawser, Catch You Later, Fran Littlewood, Amazing Grace Adams, Lori Frankel, Family, Robert Dugoni, Beyond Reasonable Doubt, Michael Ledwidge, No Safe Place, and Linda Cohen-Loigman, The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern. We are just so thrilled that you joined us. We want you to stay on the radar with us. You can find us at bookstormpodcast.com. We are also on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube, on X. And until next time, listeners, as you know, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.